Hi guys, this is my son Gordon. He's a college student and he has a degree in mathematics, associates in physics, and now he's working on computer science because he wants to go into cybersecurity. He's a math tutor at Barrett's Honors. One of the things I love about tutoring, just like I'm doing with you, is you really get a different perspective on how people learn, how people want to learn, what they need to do things. He really had some neat experiences in discussing it with calculus.
Isaac Newton discovering the apple, and that's been a bit important for me too, because he developed one of the huge fields of mathematics, calculus, and that's impacted so many things today. We wouldn't be on Mars in the first place without calculus, but it didn't start out like that. A lot of times when Newton was developing that sense, he was developing all of these equations just to develop the things that were around him. He was trying to develop why, of course, the apple is falling from the tree, as we all know that, but also how things are moving up there too, seeing like, oh, everything else around us, like the moon, is moving the same way that it's moving down here. Obviously, with a bit of give and take, these are the main things that Newton was trying to focus on.
Newton being like a lot like me, a big visualizer. Newton was alive 400 years ago. His mode of transportation was a horse or horse and buggy. We obviously now have rockets, right? So my inspiration being the space shuttle and it taking off when I was explaining it to the kids, big rotating white rocket. My trying to explain my experiences, not realizing too the visualization skills that were really used more so back even with Einstein. You know, I don't think Einstein would have been Einstein without being a patent clerk, and they really looked down on him for being a patent clerk. But his brain became such a problem solver because he was reviewing patents like just boom, 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 boom. And he could see when something was going to work or not. That dichotomy of vision, again, turns into physics and mathematics.
With the amount of thought experiments that both Newton and Einstein had, they wouldn't have been able to come up with nearly the amount of things that they did if they didn't have the mind for visualization. And so because of that, they have invented so many great things. And so people later on, after they have passed on, realized there's so much potential in these types of things that we can use them in so many different other ways. And so math has really benefited from that. We love the language of abstraction. That's what math does best, is solving not just one problem, but any similar problem. We're seeing what's the common causalities in between these different types of problems. So math is really good in that sense, but at the same time, it's lost a lot of the visualization skills. And so that's why people, without having that nice visual understanding, because everything algebra, anything calculus, anything like that, has a geometry background that they don't teach these days. And so because of that, it's really rich and eloquent once you can consider all those things and you can see it in your mind. But if you don't look at that, it's just numbers and symbols.
It's not about the task of standing or the achievement or the static pose, or I like to say a therapy stand, or because they want it to be perfect. There's been some division of the sum of all your body's movements, and it's supposed to look exactly like that. Really, what we're talking about, and he was bringing up too, the mathematical uniqueness of movement and the causalities, and looking at it's not about 1 + 1 = 2 or the sum of all equal parts, because we're not equal. But it's, to me, it's the movement and how it processes, but again, also being very visual.
So many times we take things like 1 + 1 = 2 for granted. When you dig down to it, there's a lot more behind 1 + 1 = 2. And you'd be surprised. Some mathematicians, I want to say it was around the 1800s, were nutty enough to go prove everything. And so it took them 500 proofs before they could prove that 1 + 1 = 2. There's a lot of things, even in movement, that we start to take for granted, like being able to roll over, things like that, because we don't consider all of the little minute details that will go into something like that. And if one of those things isn't met, nothing else is going to work out down the line. Even if the force of gravity was 10 to the -40th, really, really small number. If it was any percent of that different, we wouldn't have stars, we wouldn't have planets, anything. It is extremely specific how the universe is calculated. There's so many things that we take for granted, not only in how the world is formed around us, but in our own physical bodies, because you have your own little world inside of here. And so if you're just taking for granted I should be able to roll over. If your child isn't able to roll over, maybe it's not the obvious that they're not being able to breathe correctly. They're having trouble with that. They're not seeing things correctly. I'm wearing my contacts right now, but I've only had my contacts for a few years. Beyond that, I've had to use glasses, and I normally can't see past my hand. And so because of that, I've had to make so many adjustments, and all these adjustments that rely on vision, they're different adjustments that I have to make each time. And so because of that, if your child's having to make an adjustment each time, they haven't had 21 years of life experience, or however many years you've had. They've maybe not even had 1 year of life experience. So they can't make these adaptations like we have. They have to deal with what they have right now. Here at Movement Lesson, we're trying to say, given that, how can we adjust from there? Not necessarily make the adaptations, but try helping those problems, helping the non-negotiables that are in every specific function so that those variables are satisfied, and then from there, rolling over is a piece of cake.
The processes and the thought process that happens when we have experience, like that, you see that 15 years of Movement Lesson, do you see the way that his brain is organized? And organized around movement, and what he can see, and how he can be quite eloquent for his age and discuss things. Yes, I'm proud of him, but at the same time, that was a lot of input. That was a lot of input of movement, but also because he's had such a movement experience that changes it not only into a cognitive experience, but also a worldly experience. Because he has so many different variations on how to solve the problem. Whereas your child, not only do they not know that 1 + 1 is 2, there's different processes. They don't care. It's not even in their realm of processing, because the process that's going on is the interaction of movement.
First of all, with the likelihood of you being here and not being someone else is so minutely small. I think it's like 1 in a trillion or something is what they've calculated it to be. It is so infinitesimally small, and yet you are here. Your child is here, and they are them. Newton was doing these things. He was doing them on not living things. He was doing them on how far a ball is rolling, things like that. He's not necessarily focused on living things. We evolved to move from an internal perspective. Every movement that's coming out of our body is coming from ourselves. And so the more we treat our body, as people have recently, as a body, that's where we start to run into a lot of these problems. Not only in your child, but even if you see like people going out to their regular job, if you're putting a cast on somebody and restricting them to a wheelchair instead of working with them, helping them realize that internal movement structure and helping them move past those issues, the more it's going to hinder a person in the long run, because we're focusing on moving the body from an external standpoint and moving the body around the world instead of having the ability for you to move the world around your body.
Right, because the space just in between us is an organization of movement. This isn't blank. It's not that it's not there. Like if I were to blow, he would feel my breath. He might smell it. I might be pushing molecules against his face. You know, he might be getting hit with carbon or dust. There's lots of little things that happen in between this space. It's so important that in outer space with the ISIS, they have to have fans and vents around because the air doesn't move at all. And an astronaut could actually die of carbon monoxide poisoning because their breath is right here. And so they have to have the fans circulating the air because, again, what we take for granted just disappears in microgravity. What really has to be looked at is getting away from the classification of a diagnosis, creating that outcome. That classification of the way you process movement is really much more important, because the way he figures out how to lift a weight even or opens a door is going to be crucial to his life forces, just like I need it with mine. And if something interrupts that, but more so that if those kind of tools don't even come about, it's not about that wait and see. If I come into your house and have to paint the whole house, it's overwhelming. And I start thinking, well, at least we'll get this wall done. We can reorganize the furniture. Then we can get this wall done and go on from there. Again, he's wearing contacts. He used to have glasses. By the time we found out where his vision was at, he could have it surgically corrected his age. You know, all these things go into point about maybe just the structure of his vision, but that doesn't mean he has good convergence still, or his far vision, his near vision, and what he had to work with just switching from glasses, let's say, to contacts.
Heck, even to this day, I can barely balance on one leg because of things such as that, because I hadn't had that experience of convergence, because I've had to deal with my whole life of just focusing on the vision rather than focusing on things past that. And so because of that, as we were sort of saying, every individual's movement is so unique, because that's the thing. The probability of you being you is so small, but because of that, there's so many things that make you you. And so if I push my mom, I promise we've
done a lot of karate.
We're a healthy family. We're not. But if I push her and she pushes me, we're gonna have different responses. And obviously, you're saying, oh, okay, well, yeah, she got however many years on me, not to be whatever, but that's just the fact is that she's got. But at the same time, even if I had my twin next to me, I still wouldn't be pushing them the same way they're pushing me, just because we've developed differently, we've had different life experiences, and so because of that, we have different movements. Okay, yeah, you might have a giant problem of your child cannot roll over. Well, what are some of the non-negotiables in that problem? If your internal movements aren't satisfied in your survival mechanisms, I don't think you're going to be moving with a controlled, holistic body movement if one part of the holistic is failing. The whole chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Have a child rolling over, and maybe Michelle's working on just having that breathing or having that vision. You're saying, well, hold up, like what's that going to do with rolling over? And again, with the chain being as strong as the weakest link, if one of those processes isn't there and the variable isn't satisfied, something else is going to have to compensate for that. Something else is either going to have to overwork or it's just not going to get done. And so we're saying, let's try to make this process as easy as possible so that something's not having to overwork itself, or the kid's not getting frustrated with going, why is it that Johnny's rolling over but I'm not?
I just thought that these kind of levels of science, and this is what we discuss all the time because I work out my ideas through them because they're important to me.
My journey isn't over. I've still got a lot of things to learn, and that's the same time, that's the same with your child. That's the same with you. Your journey isn't over. There's so many things out there that you just don't know. At the same time, like it's okay to go back to the things like the foundational stuff, because there was a whole study of, I think this one teacher was leading a math class, and so he had more time with the kids, so he was able to do a bit more with them, but basically they were about a year behind in their studies compared to their other peers, a grade level behind. And so because of that, he said, hey, I'm going to have you guys learn the 6th grade math and the kindergarten math at the same time. Instead of growing up 1 grade level and they're still 1 grade behind, they actually went up 3 grade levels. They were 1 grade ahead. And that's because you're going back to the foundations, correcting things that you maybe misunderstood or you didn't get fully.
Or reinforcing.
Exactly, reinforcing. So that's the thing. Even if you think you do understand it, I go back to some mathematical videos that I've learned in high school. I'm here in college now and like almost ready to graduate. And I'm like, I go back to high school math and I'm like, I didn't even think of putting this with that.
It's how you're approaching movement lesson is to not to judge or look at failure evaluations. That's so typical. Failure evaluations meaning you can't do this, you can't do that. I was just getting my hip shot yesterday and I said, like, running is still, and he's like, don't run. And I'm like, oh, look, I'm not looking to do a marathon, but I should be able to run to my car and not say, ooh, my hip. Like, that's just not an option for me being movement lesson. But again, their first response, because I'm 57, like, what do you run? Don't run. No, you know what I mean? I don't want my body to be in a position where I can't do something. A lot of the language that you're trying to incorporate and still learning is new language. New language on mathematics. Eventually, it'll be rotational mathematics. I see a whole 4-year degree of coming out with movement and gravity and rotational mathematics, which I don't think has been developed yet because, again, we're not linear. Right? A lot of people can say, yes, there's rotation, axis, gyroscope. We don't focus on there's actually not a big rod through the planet Earth. And also the Earth isn't in a solar system it chases after. So, there's all those kind of dynamics of movements, but the Earth still is a living organism where the moon isn't because there's no internal rotation, rotational and oppositional rotation. That was the key when I realized that the cores come at different places. Why? Because I know when I'm doing this, for me to get this sensation of movement, that I have to be off of also a point of movement, and that's where a lot of that came from. The way that we move is about our organization of movement, and then from that organization, whether it's a deviation, it's not that we're looking for 2. We still have the 1 plus the 1, and what defines 1? Going away from the sum versus finding out where we've got to make that 1 more whole, more visible, whatever it happens to be, come into play with that is what's really important. Because let's say I had 2 cookies. Now you can say 2 cookies, 1 cookie, 2 cookie, right? But again, a real scientist is going to come in and say, well, let me weigh that cookie, let me weigh that cookie, where I got a different cookie than I have different here. This one I have chocolate, this one I have macadamia nuts, right? So that my gram total weight, I can go in. So it's not 1 plus 1 is 2. It's the appreciation that I do have two wonderful cookies, and I'm going to enjoy both of them equally, let's say.
And just like she has two wonderful kids that she's going to appreciate equally.
So thanks for everything, but thanks for learning movement lesson. Thanks for getting to this level of achievement. Thanks, guys.